The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the ornate hallway where Kate Middleton walked with measured steps. Her heels clicked softly against the polished marble floor, each sound echoing the steady rhythm of her heartbeat. Today was different. Today, she could feel the weight of unspoken tensions hanging in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Kate had learned to read the subtle signs over the years. The way the staff's eyes would dart away when she passed, the hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room, and, most telling of all, the thin smile that Camilla wore whenever their paths crossed. That smile never reached her eyes, and Kate had come to recognize it as a warning signal. As she approached the morning room where the family typically gathered for breakfast, Kate paused outside the door. Through the crack, she could hear Charles's voice, strained and agitated, discussing something with Camilla in urgent whispers. The words weren't clear, but the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a casual morning conversation between husband and wife. Taking a deep breath, Kate straightened her shoulders and entered the room. The conversation stopped immediately. Charles looked up from his newspaper, his face flushed with what appeared to be barely contained frustration. Camilla sat across from him, that familiar smile already spreading across her features. But there was something predatory about it today. "Good morning," Kate said pleasantly, her voice steady despite the tension she could feel crackling in the air. She moved toward the sideboard where breakfast was laid out, her movements graceful and unhurried. "Oh, Kate dear." Camilla's voice carried a sweetness that didn't match the coldness in her eyes. "How lovely to see you this morning. Charles and I were just discussing some family matters." The emphasis on family matters wasn't lost on Kate. It was Camilla's way of reminding everyone that despite Kate's position as the Princess of Wales, despite her marriage to William, there were still circles within circles, hierarchies within hierarchies. Kate selected a piece of toast and turned back to face the table, her expression serene. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important," she said, settling in her chair with the poise that had been drilled into her through years of royal protocol training. Charles folded his newspaper with more force than necessary, the crisp pages snapping in the quiet room. "Actually, Kate, since you're here, perhaps you'd like to weigh in on this matter we've been discussing." The way he said it made Kate's stomach tighten, but she maintained her composure. "Of course, Charles. What would you like to discuss?" Camilla leaned back in her chair, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup, watching the exchange with the satisfaction of someone who had orchestrated this moment. "We've been talking about the upcoming state dinner," she began, her voice taking on a tone of false concern. "There seems to be some confusion about protocol, particularly regarding precedence and seating arrangements." Kate took a small bite of her toast, buying herself time to process what was really happening here. She had been involved in planning state dinners before. She knew the protocols, understood the intricate dance of royal hierarchy that governed every aspect of these events. This wasn't about confusion. This was about power. "I wasn't aware there was any confusion," Kate replied carefully. "The precedence guidelines are quite clear, and I've worked closely with the Lord Chamberlain's office to ensure everything follows proper protocol." Charles's jaw tightened visibly. "The issue, Kate, is that there seem to be some assumptions being made about certain arrangements that haven't been properly discussed or approved." The words hit Kate like a physical blow, though she didn't let it show on her face. She understood now. This wasn't about protocol at all. This was about her place, her authority, her right to make decisions within the royal framework. Someone had been whispering in Charles's ear, undermining her work, questioning her judgment. "I see," Kate said quietly, setting down her toast. "Perhaps you could be more specific about which arrangements are causing concern?" Camilla's smile widened slightly, and Kate caught the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes. "Well, dear, it's really about understanding one's role within the family structure. Sometimes enthusiasm can lead to overstepping, even when the intentions are good." The words were delivered with such perfect politeness that anyone overhearing might think it was a gentle correction. But Kate heard the real message clearly. Know your place. For a moment, the room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Kate felt something shift inside her, a steel resolve that had been forged through years of public scrutiny, media attacks, and quiet resilience. She had faced down tabloid headlines, weathered personal crises, and stood by William through his own struggles with royal duty. She would not be diminished by veiled insults and power games. I appreciate your concern, Camilla, Kate said, her voice remaining perfectly calm and measured. However, I'm confident that my understanding of protocol and my role within this family is quite clear. I've been working closely with the appropriate offices, and every decision has been made in consultation with the proper authorities. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Charles's face was growing redder by the moment, and Kate could see the muscle in his jaw working as he ground his teeth together. Kate, Charles's voice carried a warning tone. I think what Camilla is trying to say is that there are certain traditions and ways of doing things that have been in place long before you joined this family. The implication stung, but Kate refused to flinch. She had heard variations of this argument for years. The suggestion that she was an outsider, that her middle-class background made her somehow less qualified to understand royal traditions. It was an old wound, but one she had learned to armor against. I understand the importance of tradition, Charles, Kate replied, her voice steady. I've spent considerable time learning about royal history and protocol. My decisions regarding the state dinner are based on established precedent and current guidelines, not personal preference or misunderstanding. Camilla set down her coffee cup with a delicate clink against the saucer. Of course, dear. No one is questioning your dedication to learning. It's just that some things come with experience, with being born into certain understandings of how things work. The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Kate felt the familiar sting of the born into it versus married into it distinction that some members of the family seemed determined to maintain. But instead of retreating, instead of apologizing or deferring as she might have done in her early years as a royal, Kate found herself straightening in her chair. Experience is indeed valuable, Kate acknowledged, her voice taking on a subtle strength. But so is fresh perspective and careful consideration of current needs and circumstances. The monarchy has always evolved with the times while maintaining its core values and traditions. Charles's newspaper crackled as his grip tightened on it. The monarchy doesn't need to evolve every time someone has a new idea about how things should be done, he said sharply. The criticism was more direct now, and Kate felt the full weight of his disapproval. But she also felt something else rising within her, a quiet determination that had been building over years of similar moments, similar attempts to make her feel small or uncertain about her place in this family. I agree completely, Kate said, her voice remaining calm despite the tension radiating from across the table. Which is why I've been so careful to ensure that all arrangements follow established protocol, while also meeting the practical needs of our guests and the current security requirements. She paused, taking a sip of her tea, using the moment to gather her thoughts and maintain her composure. When she continued, there was something new in her voice, not defiance exactly, but an unmistakable note of quiet authority. I've reviewed the guest list with the Foreign Office, coordinated with security services, and consulted historical records for similar state visits. Every detail has been carefully considered and approved through the proper channels. If there are specific concerns about any particular arrangement, I'm happy to discuss them and provide the reasoning behind each decision. The challenge was subtle but unmistakable. Kate was no longer the uncertain young woman who had married into the family over a decade ago. She had learned the rules, mastered the protocols, and earned her place through years of dedicated service. She was not going to be diminished by vague criticisms or power plays. Camilla's smile became even more fixed, though her eyes flashed with something that might have been annoyance. How thorough of you, Kate. Though I do hope you haven't forgotten that Charles, as king, has the final say in these matters. The reminder of hierarchy was delivered with poisonous sweetness, but Kate met it head-on. Of course, that's precisely why I've been working to ensure that everything is prepared to the highest standard, so that when Charles reviews the arrangements, he can be confident that every detail reflects the dignity and tradition of a monarchy. It was a masterful response, acknowledging Charles's ultimate authority while also making it clear that she had been acting within that framework all along. The implication was subtle but clear. Any problems with the arrangements would reflect not on her competence, but on the quality of criticism being leveled against her work. Charles set his newspaper down entirely, his face now showing clear signs of agitation. The morning had not gone as he had expected. What was supposed to be a simple conversation about Kate, knowing her place, had turned into something else entirely. "Kate," he said, his voice carrying the weight of royal displeasure, "I think you're missing the point here." But Kate wasn't missing the point at all. She understood exactly what was happening, just as she had understood similar moments throughout her years in the royal family. This wasn't about state dinner arrangements or protocol confusion. This was about power, about hierarchy, about reminding her that no matter how long she had been part of this family, no matter how successfully she had carried out her duties, there would always be those who saw her as an outsider who needed to be kept in line. The difference was that Kate was no longer the uncertain young woman who might have apologized and backed down. She had found her strength, her voice, and her place within this complex institution. She had learned to navigate these treacherous waters with grace and dignity, but also with an inner steel that would not bend to bullying or manipulation. As the morning light continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the tension in the ornate breakfast room, Kate realized that this moment was about more than just a state dinner or even her immediate relationship with Charles and Camilla. This was about the kind of royal she had become and the kind of future she was determined to help build for the monarchy. She took another sip of her tea, her hand steady, her expression serene. Whatever came next, she would meet it with the same quiet strength that had brought her this far. The girl who had once worried about using the wrong fork or saying the wrong thing had grown into a woman who knew her worth and her place in history. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken challenges and simmering tensions. Outside, the grounds of Windsor Castle stretched away in peaceful magnificence. But inside this room, a different kind of battle was being fought, one that would determine not just the outcome of a state dinner, but the balance of power and respect within the royal family itself. The silence in the breakfast room stretched taut as a violin string, and Kate could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. Charles's face had taken on that particular shade of red that she had come to recognize as a warning sign, the color that appeared when his authority was questioned, when the careful order of his world was disturbed. "Kate," Charles began again, his voice taking on the tone he typically reserved for addressing staff who had disappointed him, "I don't think you fully appreciate the delicate nature of the situation we're discussing here." Kate set her teacup down with deliberate care, the fine china making the softest sound against the saucer. She had learned over the years that sometimes the most powerful response was the quietest one. "I'm listening, Charles. Please help me understand what specific aspects of the arrangements are causing concern." Camilla leaned forward slightly, her expression the picture of concerned stepmother-in-law, though Kate caught the calculating gleam in her eyes. "Dear, it's not just about the specific arrangements. It's about the bigger picture, understanding how decisions like this affect the entire family dynamic." The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound reasonable while delivering a pointed message. Kate had heard similar language before, usually when someone wanted to criticize her actions without appearing to do so directly. It was the language of palace politics, where direct confrontation was avoided in favor of subtle undermining. "The family dynamic," Kate repeated thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering this new perspective. "Could you elaborate on that, Camilla? I want to make sure I understand your concerns." It was a tactical move, forcing Camilla to be more specific, to move beyond vague implications toward actual accusations. Kate had learned this technique from watching William navigate similar conversations. The art of making your opponents clarify their position until they either revealed their true motives or backed themselves into a corner. Camilla's smile flickered slightly, a brief crack in her polished facade. Well, it's just that when someone takes on responsibilities that might traditionally fall to others, it can create confusion about roles and expectations. Charles nodded emphatically, apparently glad to have the issue articulated in what he probably thought were diplomatic terms. Exactly. There are established ways of handling these events, protocols that have been refined over decades. Kate felt a familiar surge of frustration, but she kept her expression neutral. This was the same argument she had faced countless times over the years, the suggestion that her efforts to modernize and improve royal operations were somehow disrespectful to tradition. It was a convenient way to resist any change while making the person proposing improvements feel like they were the problem. "I appreciate your perspective," Kate said carefully. "However, I should clarify that I haven't taken on any responsibilities that fall outside my designated role. The state dinner arrangements I've been working on are entirely within the scope of my duties as Princess of Wales and future Queen Consort." The reminder of her future position hung in the air, a subtle but unmistakable assertion of her place in the royal hierarchy. Kate wasn't just William's wife anymore. She was the future Queen of England, and that position came with certain rights and responsibilities that couldn't be wished away by those who found her inconvenient. Charles's expression darkened further. "Your duties are what I say they are, Kate. The monarchy isn't a democracy where everyone gets to decide their own level of involvement." The words struck like a physical blow, and for a moment, Kate felt the familiar sting of being diminished, of having her contributions minimized. But this time, instead of apologizing or retreating, she felt something different rising within her, a quiet fury that had been building over years of similar moments. "Of course," Kate replied, her voice maintaining its steady calm. "However, my understanding is that my duties are defined not just by personal preference, but by constitutional tradition, historical precedent, and the needs of the monarchy as an institution." It was a carefully crafted response that acknowledged Charles's position while also asserting her own understanding of how the royal system actually worked. Kate had spent years studying royal history, learning about the evolution of royal duties and the precedents set by previous generations. She knew her rights and responsibilities better than many people realized. Camilla's coffee cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down with slightly more force than necessary. "How academic of you, Kate. Though I do hope you remember that theory and practice aren't always the same thing." The condescension was becoming more obvious now, the polite mask slipping to reveal something sharper underneath. Kate recognized this tactic too, the attempt to make her feel like an overeducated outsider who didn't understand the real way things worked within the family. "You're absolutely right about theory and practice," Kate agreed, surprising both Charles and Camilla with a ready agreement. "Which is why I've been careful to base my approach on both historical precedent and current practical needs. For instance, the security arrangements for this state dinner require modifications to traditional protocol that were never necessary in previous decades." She paused, taking another sip of tea, letting the implication settle. The world had changed since many of the royal protocols were established, and successful leadership meant adapting to new realities while maintaining core values. It was a lesson that Kate had learned not just from books, but from years of public service and increasing responsibility within the royal family. The guest list includes heads of state from regions with specific dietary requirements and security concerns that simply weren't factors when many of our current protocols were established, Kate continued. Working with the Foreign Office and security services to accommodate these modern realities while maintaining the dignity and tradition of royal hospitality seems like exactly the kind of practical application of royal duty that the monarchy needs. Charles was gripping his newspaper so tightly that Kate could see his knuckles turning white. Are you suggesting that I don't understand modern security requirements or diplomatic necessities? The question was delivered like a trap, designed to force Kate into either backing down or appearing to criticize the king directly. But Kate had learned to navigate these conversational minefields, and she met the challenge with characteristic grace. Not at all, Charles. I'm simply explaining the reasoning behind the arrangements I've made, in case that helps clarify any concerns about my approach. It was a perfect deflection, redirecting the conversation back to the actual issue at hand while avoiding the personal confrontation that Charles was trying to provoke. Kate had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to aggression was absolute professionalism. But her composed response seemed to have the opposite effect on Charles than she intended. Instead of defusing his anger, her calm professionalism appeared to inflame it further. His face was now a deeper shade of red than Kate had ever seen, and she could see a vein pulsing at his temple. "Your approach," Charles said, his voice rising slightly, "seems to involve assuming authority that you haven't been explicitly granted and making decisions that affect the entire royal family without proper consultation." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. Kate felt her heart rate increase, but she forced herself to remain outwardly calm. This was the moment she had been preparing for, consciously or unconsciously, for years. The moment when she would either assert her rightful place within the royal family or allow herself to be diminished once again. "I would respectfully disagree with that characterization," Kate said, her voice remaining steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "Every decision I've made has been within the scope of my designated responsibilities and in consultation with the appropriate offices and advisors." She paused, gathering her thoughts and her courage for what she knew would be a defining moment. "However, if you believe I've overstepped my authority in some way, I would appreciate specific examples so that I can address your concerns appropriately." It was a direct challenge, professionally delivered, but unmistakable in its intent. Kate was no longer willing to accept vague criticisms or implied inadequacies. If Charles had specific objections to her work, he would need to articulate them clearly and specifically. Camilla's smile had disappeared entirely now, replaced by an expression of barely concealed hostility. "Kate, dear, I think you may be misunderstanding the nature of this conversation." "Then, please help me understand," Kate replied evenly. "Because from my perspective, we're discussing arrangements for a state dinner that I've been working on as part of my official duties, using established protocols and in consultation with appropriate advisors. If there's something I'm missing, I genuinely want to understand what it is." The request was delivered with such apparent sincerity that it was difficult to attack without appearing unreasonable. Kate had learned this technique from watching diplomatic exchanges. The art of making your opponents explain their position until they either revealed their true motives or revealed the weakness of their arguments. Charles slammed his hand down on the table with enough force to make the china rattle, causing both women to start slightly. The mask of royal composure finally slipped completely, revealing the raw anger underneath. "What you're missing," Charles said, his voice thick with frustration and fury, "is that this family has functioned successfully for centuries without needing constant innovation and improvement project from people who think they know better than generations of tradition." The words exploded out of him like steam from a pressure cooker, carrying with them years of accumulated frustration and resentment. Kate realized that this wasn't really about the state dinner at all. This was about much deeper issues of power, tradition, and resistance to change that had been building within the royal family for years. In the silence that followed Charles's outburst, Kate found herself facing a crucial choice. She could apologize, back down, and return to the familiar pattern of deference that had characterized her earlier years in the family. Or she could stand her ground and assert her place as a full member of the royal family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. Looking at Camilla's satisfied expression and Charles's furious face, Kate realized that this moment was about more than just her own position. This was about the future of the monarchy itself, about whether it would continue to evolve and adapt to serve the people it represented, or whether it would retreat into rigid tradition and become increasingly irrelevant. "Charles," Kate said quietly, her voice cutting through the tension in the room like a blade, "I have never claimed to know better than generations of tradition. What I have tried to do is honor that tradition while ensuring that the monarchy continues to serve its purpose effectively in the modern world." She stood slowly, her movements graceful and deliberate, her posture reflecting the confidence that years of public service had given her. "The state dinner arrangements I've been working on maintain every essential element of royal protocol, while addressing practical concerns that simply didn't exist when many of our current procedures were established. This isn't about innovation for its own sake. It's about responsible stewardship of the institution we all serve." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Kate had found her voice, her strength, and her place within this complex family dynamic. Whatever happened next, she would meet it not as an uncertain outsider seeking approval, but as a senior member of the royal family with her own authority and her own vision for the monarchy's future. Kate's words hung in the morning air like an unretractable declaration. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to illuminate the moment with crystalline clarity, highlighting the three figures frozen in this tableau of royal confrontation. Charles's face had gone from red to an alarming shade of purple, while Camilla sat back in her chair with the expression of someone who had just watched a carefully orchestrated plan backfire spectacularly. "Responsible stewardship," Charles repeated slowly, his voice dripping with dangerous quiet. Kate recognized this tone. It was the precursor to royal fury unleashed, the calm before the storm that everyone in the palace had learned to fear. "Are you implying that the rest of us have been irresponsible stewards of the crown?" The question was a trap, designed to force Kate into either an insulting position or a defensive retreat. But Kate had spent over a decade navigating these treacherous conversational waters, and she had learned that sometimes the only way forward was through absolute honesty delivered with absolute respect. "I'm saying that each generation of royals has faced different challenges and has had to adapt the monarchy to serve their era effectively," Kate replied, her voice steady despite the tremor of adrenaline she could feel in her chest. "Queen Victoria faced different challenges than Queen Elizabeth II, who faced different challenges than we face today. Successful monarchy has always been about maintaining core values while adapting methods." It was a brilliant response, historically accurate, respectful of tradition, and impossible to argue with without appearing to dismiss the successful adaptations that had kept the monarchy relevant through centuries of change. Kate had learned to armor herself in knowledge, to make her positions unassailable through careful research and thoughtful reasoning. Camilla leaned forward, her eyes glittering with something that might have been admiration mixed with hostility. "How fascinating that you see yourself as part of a historical continuum with Queen Victoria and the late Queen Elizabeth," she said, her tone suggesting that such a comparison was presumptuous. "I see all of us as part of that continuum," Kate corrected gently, her gaze including both Camilla and Charles in her response. "The monarchy is bigger than any individual member. We're all temporary custodians of an institution that must survive and thrive long after we're gone." The words carried a subtle but unmistakable message. Kate understood her role not just as William's wife or even as future queen, but as a servant of something larger than personal ambition or family politics. It was a perspective that had taken her years to develop, forged through public scrutiny, personal challenges, and the gradual realization that her position came with both privileges and profound responsibilities. Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that seemed to echo his internal agitation. He began to pace behind his place at the table, his movements sharp and agitated, like a caged animal looking for an escape route or a target for his frustration. "Temporary custodians," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion Kate couldn't quite identify. Was it anger? Fear? Frustration? at feeling his authority questioned. Temporary custodians who apparently don't need to consult with the actual king before making decisions about state functions. Kate remained seated, her posture straight but not rigid, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She had learned that sometimes the most powerful response to agitation was perfect stillness, that calm confidence could be more devastating than raised voices or dramatic gestures. "Every consultation I've had has been documented, Charles," she said quietly. "The Lord Chamberlain's office, the Foreign Secretary, the security services, all of our discussions and decisions are on record. If you'd like me to provide a detailed timeline of every consultation and approval, I'm happy to do so." It was another perfectly calibrated response, offering transparency while subtly highlighting that proper procedures had been followed. Kate was no longer the uncertain young woman who might have stumbled through an explanation or offered unnecessary apologies. She had become something far more formidable, a royal who understood both the system and her place within it. Camilla's coffee cup clinked against her saucer with slightly more force than necessary. "How very thorough of you, Kate. Though I think Charles's concern might be more about the spirit of family consultation rather than just bureaucratic procedures." The words were delivered with that particular brand of sweetness that had become Camilla's signature when delivering criticism. But Kate heard the real message clearly. This wasn't about official procedures or proper protocols. This was about power dynamics within the family itself, about who deferred to whom, about maintaining hierarchies that had nothing to do with official roles or responsibilities. "I appreciate that perspective, Camilla," Kate replied, her voice maintaining its steady calm. "However, I should clarify that family consultation and official consultation are different things with different purposes. State dinners are official functions that require coordination with government offices and security services. Family input is always welcome, but the primary considerations must be diplomatic, security, and protocol requirements." It was a masterful distinction that simultaneously acknowledged Camilla's concern while asserting the primacy of Kate's official responsibilities. Kate had learned to navigate these conversations like a skilled diplomat, acknowledging emotions while staying grounded in facts and procedures. Charles whirled around to face her, his movements sharp with barely controlled fury. "Don't lecture me about the difference between family and official business, Kate. I've been managing both for longer than you've been alive." The words hit like a slap, carrying not just anger, but a dismissiveness that reduced Kate to nothing more than an inexperienced interloper. It was the kind of comment designed to make her feel small, to remind her of her relative newness to the family, and her age compared to Charles's decades of royal experience. But instead of shrinking from the attack, Kate felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity of purpose that cut through years of accumulated hurt and self-doubt. She stood slowly, her movement graceful and deliberate, and when she spoke, her voice carried a new quality that neither Charles nor Camilla had heard before. "You're absolutely right, Charles," Kate said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly across the room. "You have been managing royal duties for longer than I've been alive. And in that time, you've seen the monarchy face unprecedented challenges: media scrutiny, public skepticism, changing social values, and evolving expectations about royal relevance." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing with devastating calm. "You've also seen how the monarchy has survived those challenges, not by retreating into rigid tradition, but by finding ways to honor its core purpose while adapting to serve each new generation effectively. That's the lesson I've learned from watching you, from studying royal history, and from my own experiences serving the crown." The words were carefully chosen to acknowledge Charles's experience, while also asserting her own understanding of royal duty. Kate wasn't attacking his record or his knowledge. She was positioning herself as someone who had learned from his example, while developing her own perspective on effective royal service. Charles's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and finally a kind of fury that seemed to come from having his own words and example used to justify the very behavior he was criticizing. "How dare you?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "How dare you use my experience and my service to justify your presumption?" The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence, but Kate didn't flinch. She had spent years being criticized for everything from her fashion choices to her family background, and she had developed an inner strength that couldn't be shaken by royal displeasure or family politics. "I'm not justifying presumption, Charles," Kate replied, her voice remaining steady despite the intensity of the moment. "I'm explaining my approach to royal duty based on what I've learned about effective monarchy from history, from observation, and from my own experience." She moved slightly, her posture shifting in a way that somehow made her appear both more relaxed and more formidable. "The state dinner arrangements I've been working on reflect everything I understand about royal hospitality, diplomatic protocol, and modern security requirements. If you have specific concerns about any of those arrangements, I'm eager to discuss them and make any necessary adjustments." It was another redirection to the practical issue at hand, but this time it carried an undertone of challenge. Kate was essentially saying that if Charles had real problems with her work, he should articulate them specifically rather than resorting to personal attacks and vague criticisms about overstepping. Camilla stood as well, her movement less graceful than Kate's, but carrying its own kind of authority. "This isn't about specific arrangements anymore, Kate," she said, her voice dropping the pretense of sweetness. "This is about respect and understanding your place within this family." The words were delivered like a gauntlet thrown down, a direct challenge to Kate's position and authority. It was the kind of confrontation that Camilla had probably been building toward for years, and Kate realized that this moment had been inevitable from the day she married William. "My place in this family," Kate repeated thoughtfully, as if she were genuinely considering this question for the first time. "You're right, Camilla. That is what this is really about, isn't it?" She turned to look directly at Camilla, her gaze steady and unflinching. "I am William's wife, the Princess of Wales, and the future Queen of England. My place in this family is defined not by anyone's personal preferences or comfort levels, but by constitutional reality and the responsibilities that come with my position." The words were delivered without hostility, but with absolute certainty, and they seemed to change the very atmosphere in the room. Kate wasn't just asserting her titles. She was asserting her understanding of what those titles meant and her commitment to fulfilling the duties they entailed. "My work on the state dinner isn't presumption," Kate continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "It's the fulfillment of my responsibilities as a senior member of the royal family. If that makes anyone uncomfortable, I understand, but it won't change my commitment to serving the crown effectively." Charles had gone very still during this exchange, his earlier agitation replaced by something that looked almost like shock. Kate realized that he had expected this conversation to go very differently. He had expected her to back down, to apologize, to defer to his authority and Camilla's seniority. Instead, she had done something unprecedented. She had claimed her place in the royal hierarchy with quiet but unmistakable authority. "You think your position makes you untouchable," Charles said finally, his voice carrying a new kind of menace. "You think being William's wife and the future queen gives you carte blanche to do whatever you please." Kate shook her head slowly, her expression remaining calm despite the escalating tension. "I think my position comes with responsibilities that I take very seriously. And I think that fulfilling those responsibilities sometimes requires making decisions that not everyone will be comfortable with." The admission was honest and direct, acknowledging that her actions might create discomfort while asserting her right to act according to her understanding of her duties. It was the response of someone who had moved beyond seeking approval to simply doing what she believed was right. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, but the atmosphere in the breakfast room had become something dark and electric, charged with confrontation that had been years in the making. Kate stood in the center of it all, no longer the uncertain young woman who had once worried about every word and gesture, but a royal who had found her voice and her strength. Whatever happened next, she was ready for it. The girl who had once trembled at royal disapproval had become a woman who could stand her ground against the king himself. The tension in the breakfast room had reached a breaking point, like the moment before lightning strikes when the very air seems to vibrate with electrical potential. Charles stood frozen in the center of the room, his face a mask of barely controlled rage, while Camilla watched from her position near the table with the satisfied expression of someone whose careful manipulation had finally borne fruit. And Kate stood with a stillness that spoke of absolute resolve, her transformation from uncertain newcomer to confident royal complete. Responsibilities, Charles repeated, his voice dripping with contempt. You speak about responsibilities as if you invented the concept, as if the rest of us have been stumbling through our duties, waiting for you to show us the proper way. The sarcasm was thick and bitter, but Kate didn't flinch. She had learned over the years that sometimes the most devastating response to mockery was simple truth, delivered without defensiveness or apology. I speak about responsibilities because they define everything I do as a member of this family, Kate replied evenly. Every public appearance, every charitable commitment, every official function, they're all expressions of the responsibility I feel to serve the crown and the people it represents. She paused, her gaze moving between Charles and Camilla with steady confidence. The state dinner arrangements I've been working on are just one example of that responsibility in action. Nothing more, but certainly nothing less. Camilla's laugh was sharp and humorless, cutting through the morning air like broken glass. How noble you make it sound, Kate. As if your little project management exercises are somehow saving the monarchy. The dismissal was designed to diminish Kate's work and reduce her efforts to mere busy work, but Kate had heard similar criticisms before. She had learned to recognize the pattern. When people couldn't attack the substance of her work, they attacked the importance of the work itself. I don't think I'm saving the monarchy, Kate said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality that made both Charles and Camilla pause. I think I'm serving it. The same way you serve it, Camilla, when you fulfill your own duties. The same way Charles serves it when he carries out his responsibilities as king. It was a powerful reframing that positioned all of them as servants of the same institution rather than competitors for authority within it. Kate had learned this approach from studying successful diplomatic negotiations, the art of finding common ground even in the midst of conflict. But Charles wasn't ready for common ground. His anger had been building for too long, fed by too many small frustrations and perceived slights to be easily defused by diplomatic language. Don't you dare compare your amateur fumbling with my lifetime of service, Charles exploded, his voice rising to a level that Kate was certain could be heard throughout this wing of the castle. I have dedicated every day of my life to preparing for the throne, to understanding what it means to be king, to honoring traditions that stretch back centuries. The words came out in a rush of fury and pain, carrying with them years of accumulated pressure and expectation. Kate realized that this wasn't really about her work on the state dinner, or even about her place in the family hierarchy. This was about Charles's own insecurities, his long wait for the throne, his fears about his legacy, and his worthiness for the role he had finally inherited. You're absolutely right, Kate said, her voice cutting through his anger with surprising gentleness. Your dedication to the monarchy is extraordinary, and your preparation for kingship is unparalleled. That's exactly why I've been so careful to ensure that every arrangement for the state dinner reflects the dignity and tradition that you represent. The response was unexpected, acknowledging Charles's anger while redirecting it towards something constructive. Kate had learned that sometimes the most effective way to deal with fury was to find the legitimate concern underneath it and address that directly. Charles stopped mid-breath, clearly prepared for defensiveness or counterattack, but thrown off balance by Kate's acknowledgement of his service. For a moment, The rage on his face flickered, replaced by something that might have been confusion or even gratitude. But Camilla wasn't ready to let the confrontation defuse so easily. She had been building toward this moment for too long, carefully laying groundwork and creating opportunities for exactly this kind of conflict. "How gracious of you to acknowledge Charles's qualifications," Camilla said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I'm not sure that changes the fundamental issue we're discussing here." Kate turned to face Camilla directly, her movement deliberate and controlled. She had recognized from the beginning that Camilla was the real architect of this confrontation, the one who had been whispering criticisms and stoking resentments until they reached this explosive point. "What would you say the fundamental issue is, Camilla?" Kate asked, her voice perfectly calm and genuinely curious, as if she were truly interested in understanding Camilla's perspective. It was a strategic question that forced Camilla to articulate her position clearly, to move beyond implications and innuendo toward specific accusations. Kate had learned that sometimes the best way to defeat manipulation was to make it visible. Camilla's smile became more fixed, and Kate could see her calculating how to phrase her response to maximum effect. "The fundamental issue, dear Kate, is about understanding hierarchy and showing appropriate deference to those who have been serving the crown longer than you." The words were chosen carefully, designed to sound reasonable while delivering a clear message about Kate's place in the family pecking order. It was classic Camilla, using the language of tradition and respect to mask what was essentially a power play. Kate nodded thoughtfully, as if she were seriously considering this perspective. "I see. So your concern is that I haven't shown sufficient deference in my approach to organizing the state dinner." The question was delivered with such apparent sincerity that Camilla found herself nodding before she realized the trap she was walking into. "Exactly," Camilla said, satisfaction creeping into her voice. "There are ways of doing things, protocols about consultation and approval that need to be followed." Kate tilted her head slightly, her expression remaining curious and open. "Could you help me understand which specific protocols I've failed to follow? Because my understanding is that I've coordinated with all the appropriate offices and received all necessary approvals for the arrangements I've made." It was a masterstroke of diplomatic maneuvering. Kate had forced Camilla to either provide specific examples of wrongdoing or admit that her complaints were based on hurt feelings rather than actual protocol violations. Either way, the weakness of Camilla's position would become clear. Charles, who had been watching this exchange with growing agitation, stepped forward with renewed fury. "This isn't about specific protocols, Kate. This is about respect. This is about recognizing that some of us have been serving this institution since before you knew it existed." The attack was personal and painful, designed to reduce Kate to nothing more than an inexperienced outsider who had stumbled into the royal family without understanding or earning her place. But Kate had heard variations of this criticism many times over the years, and she had developed her own understanding of what respect really meant within the context of royal service. "You're absolutely right about respect, Charles," Kate said, her voice remaining steady despite the intensity of the moment. "Respect is central to everything we do as royals. Respect for the crown, respect for the people we serve, respect for the traditions that have sustained the monarchy through centuries of change." She paused, gathering her thoughts for what she knew would be the defining moment of this confrontation. "But I've learned that true respect for the monarchy means more than just following established procedures. It means constantly working to ensure that those procedures serve their intended purpose, representing the crown with dignity while meeting the practical needs of modern diplomacy and public service." The words carried the weight of years of reflection and experience, of lessons learned through public scrutiny and private challenges. Kate wasn't just defending her work on the state dinner. She was articulating her philosophy of royal service, her understanding of what it meant to be a modern royal in an ancient institution. "The arrangements I've made for the state dinner honor every essential element of royal tradition while addressing security requirements and diplomatic considerations that simply didn't exist when many of our current protocols were established. Kate continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. This isn't about disrespecting tradition. It's about ensuring that tradition continues to serve its purpose effectively. Charles's face had gone through another series of color changes, and Kate could see the vein at his temple pulsing with increased intensity. You think you can just redefine respect and tradition to suit your own preferences, he said, his voice low and dangerous. I think I can fulfill my responsibilities as Princess of Wales and future queen by working to ensure that royal functions reflect the highest standards of dignity, efficiency, and diplomatic effectiveness, Kate replied, her tone remaining calm, but carrying an unmistakable note of authority. The words hung in the air like a declaration of independence. Kate wasn't asking for permission anymore, wasn't seeking approval for her approach to royal duty. She was stating her understanding of her role and her commitment to fulfilling it according to her own judgment and conscience. Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh sound that seemed to echo the brittleness in her voice. Your understanding of your role seems to be remarkably expansive, Kate. My understanding of my role is based on constitutional precedent, historical analysis, and practical necessity, Kate replied without hesitation. The Princess of Wales has traditionally played a significant role in state functions and diplomatic hospitality. I'm simply fulfilling the traditional role while adapting to modern requirements. It was another brilliant response that grounded Kate's actions in historical precedent while asserting her right to adapt those precedents to current circumstances. She had become masterful at using royal tradition to defend innovation, at finding ways to honor the past while serving the present. Charles was pacing again, his movements becoming more agitated with each step. Historical precedent, he muttered. You've been part of this family for barely a decade, and now you're lecturing us about historical precedent. I'm not lecturing anyone, Kate said quietly. I'm explaining my approach to royal duty and the reasoning behind the decisions I've made. If that comes across as lecturing, I apologize, but I won't apologize for taking my responsibilities seriously. The distinction was crucial. Kate was acknowledging that her manner might be perceived as presumptuous while absolutely refusing to apologize for her commitment to effective royal service. It was the response of someone who had found the balance between humility and strength, between respect for others and respect for her own position and judgment. The morning light had shifted as the confrontation progressed, casting different shadows across the ornate breakfast room. But the light falling on Kate seemed to illuminate something new in her bearing, a confidence and authority that had been years in the making but was now fully realized. I understand that my approach to royal duty might make some people uncomfortable, Kate said, her voice carrying across the tension-filled room with perfect clarity. Change often does. But my commitment is to serving the crown effectively, not to maintaining comfort levels or traditional power dynamics that might no longer serve the monarchy's best interests. It was a powerful closing statement that acknowledged the discomfort her approach created while refusing to be constrained by it. Kate had become something that neither Charles nor Camilla had expected, a royal who understood both tradition and innovation, who could honor the past while serving the future. As the silence stretched between them, Kate realized that something fundamental had shifted in this room, in her relationship with Charles and Camilla, and in her understanding of her own place within the royal family. She was no longer the uncertain young woman seeking approval and acceptance. She had become a force in her own right, a senior royal with her own vision for how the monarchy should serve its people. The girl who had once worried about using the wrong fork had grown into a woman who could stand her ground against the King of England himself. And in that transformation, she had found not just her own strength, but perhaps a path forward for the monarchy itself, a way to honor tradition while embracing the changes necessary for continued relevance and service. Whatever happened next, Kate knew she had found her voice, her strength, and her place in history. She had become exactly what the monarchy needed her to be. Not just a princess, but a leader ready to help guide the institution into its future while honoring its past. The silent strength that had sustained her through years of criticism and challenge had finally found its full expression, and she would never again allow herself to be diminished by those who mistook her grace for weakness.